Welcome back. We're talking about the latest ceasefire in Gaza, and joining us from Tel Aviv is the spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Paul Hertzon. Mr. Hertzon, thanks for joining us again. The reaction from Israel has been mixed. We're hearing both supporters and people who oppose this deal, people who criticize it. But I want to read to you the reaction of the mayor of Ashkelon. That's an Israeli city, which is very close to Gaza. Many people consider it on the front lines of the Hamas rocket attacks. And this is what he said. He said, any concession to Hamas is a concession to terrorism. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's an indication of the very dynamic and very healthy democratic conversation that takes place in Israel. We have the entire plethora of the political spectrum, which now that hopefully we have a permanent ceasefire, is no longer united backing the government and the military, but is having a conversation, an honest and an open conversation about where we are.
Well, how do you answer those Israelis who do say this was a concession to terrorism?
Well, I'm not sure that there was any concession to terrorism here. Look, we went into this conflict very reluctantly. We didn't want to be in this conflict. We said so all along. For 3 weeks prior to our entering into this conflict, we said that quiet would be answered with quiet. We said calm would be answered with calm. Hamas rejected this out of hand. They chose an escalation. We were left with no choice but to activate the military. 11 ceasefires we accepted, we implemented, we abided by. Hamas either rejected or violated all 11s. We did everything we could to get out of this conflict. Hey, our goal was very simple from the beginning, and that is that Hamas and the other terror organizations cannot continue to attack Israelis. If that is the case now, it remains to be seen, then we've achieved our goal.
Right, when you talk about your goal, let's get back to the question that we posed at the outset of this program in the introduction. What did Israel gain from this agreement?
Well, it remains to be seen whether Hamas abides by the ceasefire this time. This is the 12th. This is supposed to be a permanent ceasefire. So far, we're approaching the end of the first day, and hopefully it will be a permanent ceasefire. But assuming that the ceasefire holds, what we've gained is exactly what we set out to do, and that is that Hamas and the other terror organizations will no longer attack Israelis. We've ensured it to a certain degree by decommissioning these terror tunnels, these few dozen terror tunnels that traverse the international frontiers, through which they were injecting death squads to attack. And dismantling and depleting a very significant portion of their rocket arsenal and of the general military infrastructure. But at the end of the day, the goal is that Hamas and the other terror organizations won't attack Israelis, and if the ceasefire holds, then that's been achieved.
If we look at more of the response on the Israeli side, about 50% of the Israeli cabinet have criticized this deal, and they include some key cabinet ministers, people like Avigdor Lieberman, Yitzhak Aharonovich, and Naftali Bennett. Why such divisions in the cabinet?
Well, again, I think that's the beauty of living in a democracy as opposed to rather dark and brutal dictatorship, which we see in other parts of the Middle East, not least Hamas's behavior down in Gaza. Israel is a multi-party democracy, many parties forming a coalition within the government. You mentioned my boss, the foreign minister, who comes from one party, the prime minister comes from another. They have differences of opinion. I think it's only natural in a democracy.
Let's listen to the Hamas view of the truce. This is the Hamas spokesman, Sami Abu Zori. This is what he had to say. Let's watch.
We won today, and the value of this achievement is not in opening a crossing here or there, but this achievement prepares the way for the liberation of Jerusalem and the land of Palestine.
If we take away the details of this agreement, if we look at the big picture, if I could put it that way, Israel regards Hamas as a terrorist organization. Yes. But haven't you, in effect, been forced here to deal with Hamas, to negotiate with Hamas, to make concessions to Hamas?
Well, not only Israel, but the United States, the European Union, Canada, Australia, Japan, Egypt, others have recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization, as they are. Not only Hamas, to be fair, there's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a few other even more crazy gangs and groups out there in Gaza. As to making concessions, look, we accepted the Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire back in July the 15th. It's only tragic that it wasn't accepted by Hamas then, and some 95% of the casualties could have been avoided. But what's happened now? Let's look at what's happened. The Egyptian proposal is that both sides, Israel and Hamas, will cease all hostilities. They will no longer attack Israel. We will no longer respond. That's essentially what's been agreed. Within a month from now, we will start a conversation via the Egyptians, excuse me, at which all parties will put their claims. We haven't got there yet. We would like to see the demilitarization of Gaza, and we would like to see the return of the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers, which are being held by Hamas.
I want you to just listen to something I'm going to read here, and this is from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and this is how it characterizes this understanding, as you've put it. It says, a cold calculation of costs versus benefits compared to the situation on July 7th seems to show that Israel lost more. All it got was the restoration of the previous situation without anything to show for it, while it paid with 68 deaths, hundreds of wounded, and thousands of people uprooted from their homes.
Well, here again, you see exactly the difference between ourselves and Hamas. You see in the conversation very deep grief and pain at the loss of life on both sides of this conflict, both amongst the Israelis and amongst the Palestinians. And on the other side, you see celebration, parties. Look, people are bound to say what they want. I think we're less than 24 hours into the ceasefire. I think that in historical terms, we've learned that one needs more than months to assess exactly what happens. But the record is such that Israel continues to progress, to move forward, to grow our economy, our production on the cultural and art scenes, our human rights organizations, and sadly, the Palestinians are stuck under the jackboot of Hamas and not going anywhere.
Right, you want Hamas to demilitarize, you want to stop all hostile activity coming from Gaza, or for that matter, from anywhere else. Why did Israel not seek any kind of mechanism to ensure that this would happen, that you would have a guarantee that this would happen, would not happen rather, would maybe possibly third-party forces ensuring that this agreement could stand?
It's an excellent question. And we've been exactly down that route. The Europeans, some years back, had a monitoring of the borders. They left. You know when they left? They left when Hamas activated a coup, killed hundreds of members of Fatah who were the elected authority, threw them off the 7th story of a building, and took control of the Gaza Strip. And that's precisely when the international monitors left that day. But you know, we're looking for mechanisms which can guarantee. This is the question. Are we going to today get to a situation where we now, in an attempt to rebuild Gaza, the international community, find that 2 years from now, Hamas has done exactly what they did for the past 2 years, which is divert $1.2 billion of construction material from civil purposes to terror purposes, from above the ground to below the ground, from the possibility of building schools and hospitals to the reality of building terror tunnels and command and control centers and launch pads. That's precisely what we do need the monitoring and perhaps the international monitoring for. The challenge is, how do we do this when we're up against one of the darkest schools in modern political history, one which has essentially elevated suicide to a place in society which amounts to nothing less than the worship of death? That's who these people are. They're cut from the same cloth as Boko Haram down in Nigeria and ISIS up in Syria and Iraq. They have very little, if any, value in human life, and they don't play by the rules of the international community.
Right, I have one final question, and I'd be really grateful if you could keep this brief. We're running out of time. Israel's chosen partner, negotiating partner, is Mahmoud Abbas. He's the Palestinian Authority president. By not giving him any significant major concessions over the past few months or maybe the past few years, and then agreeing to this understanding with Hamas, have you not undermined his credibility?
Well, I don't know whether it's up to us to make his credibility or to undermine his credibility. The Palestinians chose him, and that was fine with us, and he's the person that we're negotiating with him. The people who undermined his authority were Hamas. I remind you, back in 2007, they activated a coup. They activated a private militia against the elected authority, threw them out of the Gaza Strip, and that has been the primary obstacle to progress towards a peace agreement. We look forward to the getting back to peace talks with the Palestinians under President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority.
Paul Hertzon in Tel Aviv, thank you, sir.